is described as a young, beautiful, innocent maiden who loves to play in the beautiful fields in spring. So she symbolizes everything innocent about us, our goodness, our lightness, our carefreeness. She's naive, she's pure. She's the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. And Demeter is the goddess of harvest. So Persephone is described as always playing in the fields, oblivious to the dark side of life and to the dark side of human nature. So one day, Hades, the king of the underworld, sees her and is so captured by her beauty and by her innocence. And like always, dark attracts light and light attracts dark. So he was so captured by her that he had to possess her. So he goes into the light and he abducts her. He kidnaps her. He takes her with him into the underworld. This was a very traumatizing experience for Persephone, as you can imagine. She had never experienced, she had never explored the depths of darkness. So she plunges into the underworld, traumatized, tortured by its shadows. Her mother, Demeter, who had always overprotected her, always made sure that she was never exposed to the pain of our shadow, went into mourning. She couldn't bear that her child had to face the dark reality of life. So her mother mourned. She took away spring and withered into fall and shivered into winter. And Persephone, her daughter, stayed in the underworld, tortured, traumatizing, not knowing how to integrate the shadow with her light. But eventually, as the months progressed, Persephone began to evolve. She did have to let go of her identity as the pure one, as the innocent one, as the good one. She did have to let that go a little bit. But instead, she began evolving into something else, into something wiser, into someone who could integrate her darkness and her light. Hungry, one day, she ate 6 seeds of a pomegranate. That was the trap. Hades kept her for 6 months, 1 seed for every month in the underworld. This story is not only a myth to explain why there is summer and winter, or why there is cold and heat. It's a far more complex mythology. It's a mythology that speaks to human nature. It speaks to the fact that if we deny and we live in oblivion, clueless to our dark depths of the shadow, we will never truly emerge wise and truly fully the goddess or the gods we are meant to be. We cannot deny and escape from some undeniable, harsh truths of our human nature. We cannot avoid feeling painful feelings. We cannot avoid the fact that each one of us feels fear, feels envy, feels greed, feels loathing, hatred. We cannot pretend that these shadow emotions do not exist. We cannot erase them when our children's plea for us is to recognize that they do sometimes hate us. And they do sometimes feel an insecurity so trembling. We cannot pretend that all of this does not exist within us, within each other, and within our children. All of us are running. We're just running away from pain. We are so terrorized, so afraid that pain will overpower us. Little do we realize that the further we run from pain, its shadow will run us over. The more we believe that pain will break us down, the more we will keep it from breaking us open. Pain breaks us open to greater depths, greater courage, greater evolution, and greater consciousness. Pain is the ultimate portal to consciousness. But as children, in our culture, right now, we're doing this with our children, and this is how we were raised. We were raised not to confront painful feelings. We were taught to be afraid of our own fear. We were taught to be afraid of our own inadequacy. We were taught to be afraid of our own insecurities. Don't be insecure. Don't be afraid. Stop crying. You said you hate me? Don't go to your room. You're grounded. So natural human emotions have been pushed into the shadow. And we do this with our children all the time. Why? Because we are afraid of its depths. We are afraid that the darkness will overpower us. So we keep running, and it keeps chasing. And the larger the shadow in our lives grows, shadow meaning all our unexplored feelings, all our unexpressed emotions, the more we push it into the shadow, the more the shadow looms. And soon the shadow begins taking over. So when we open the fridge and we eat mindlessly, that's the shadow. And the drugs in the needle in our arm, that's the shadow. And the booze in the bottle that we drink to forget our pain, that's the shadow. And the sex we have with the many men to forget who we are in our core, that's the shadow. The shadow keeps on growing. Our children, when they don't get out of bed in the morning because they're so overwhelmed with competition and insecurity, that's the shadow. Our children, when they're yelling and screaming at us, afraid to share their true emotions, so they mask it in anger, yearning to reach out to us, but we can't hear them, that's the shadow. Our children, when they beg us to get plastic surgery, or when they keep saying that they're too fat, or they need to be prettier, that's the shadow. We cannot escape the shadow. The more we deny the shadow, the more it'll grow and fester. And the pus from the wound will just spread in our lives. So how do we confront the shadow? How do we begin to enter the shadow without fear? You know, many of us in our culture, because we are trained and conditioned to put the whitewash, to put the pretty paint over difficult feelings, we believe that we are actually in a higher state of consciousness when we do so. We believe we are loving, and we're pleasing, and we're nice, and we're kind, and we're good. But we can't be nice and kind and good if we're avoiding reality. So for example, many women who live in abusive relationships, they come to me confused, right? Because they're supposed to be good, and they're supposed to be loving. All the traditions, all the religions tell us we're supposed to forgive. So they come to me and they tell me, you know, they talk about how their husbands or their bosses or their friends are abusing them. But then they say, but aren't I supposed to forgive? And aren't I supposed to be compassionate? So there's some confusion there. And I explain, you cannot first forgive without first accepting. You cannot first love and move on without first confronting the as is. And sometimes the as is really ugly. And we're afraid to look at the as is and see it for what it is because we don't like ugly. So we hide from ugly. But ugly is just ugly, like beautiful is just beautiful. If we can just accept the as is. So I tell these women who are in abusive relationships, no, you don't forgive your husband before you see where your husband is at. You don't just forgive your friend until you see and accept that this is part of your husband's nature. This is part of your friend's nature. First, you need to accept that this is where they are in their evolution. First, you need to accept that this is where they are stuck in their evolution. And if you don't see it, then you will become stuck. If you pretend like, oh, no, they didn't mean it, and he just lost his temper, and he was just tired at work, or she doesn't really mean to abuse me, and she was just being unconscious. No, it's more than that. We get stuck in patterns, and we need to see where each one of us gets stuck in patterns, as is. And if those patterns don't work for us, we can move on. We don't have to stay there to get abused or to get betrayed by people simply because we're trying to be good. First, we accept the as is. And the as is has both the shadow and the light. Once you fully confront the as is of our own nature and of the natures of those around you, then you make a decision to forgive, to move on, to accept. But first, see the as is for both its shadow and its light. Do not avoid the shadow. Most of us either avoid it or we react to it. So Persephone's mother, she reacted to it. She took away spring and she punished the earth with winter. Most of us punish each other when we see the shadow in the other. We react with anger. We retaliate. We compete. That's not confronting the shadow. That's reacting to the shadow. And then the shadow is still in us. Or we avoid the shadow. Persephone lived her life in the upper world avoiding. She didn't even know the shadow existed. Many of us live like that. We avoid the shadow. We either avoid or we react. How about simply understand that the shadow and light is part of human nature? This is the level of our human nature, to have both shadow and light. You have to ask yourself, how do I see it for what it is, and then make my choice to act, to respond, and to be in consciousness with it. So, let me give you some examples of how the shadow shows up in real life. I had a 17-year-old girl call me the other day telling me how her mother wanted her to get a nose job because her nose wasn't perfect. And the girl said to me, you know, till a few days ago, I thought I was a pretty girl. But now I'm thinking maybe I'm not, because my mother is insisting that my nose will keep drooping and drooping and drooping. And by the time I'm 25, I said, what? It's going to fall to the ground? So we texted back and forth. I was in another state at that point, so I couldn't really call her. So I was texting, and I said, you need to believe in who you are. Yes, your nose is not perfect, but you still are. You need to embrace your imperfections with your beauty. Then only will you be whole. But if you give in to your mother's shadow of insecurity and inadequacy, and if you give in to her desire to avoid holding both your ugliness and your beauty, then you will forever keep spiraling. If you give in to your mother's shadow, which is really her inadequacy, her insecurity, then you will sell your soul. And then how about this other woman who just had a huge sweet 16 for her daughter, spent only of money and wealth, the trappings, the jewelry, the external trinkets, but she's not confronting who she is without that. But the shadow doesn't only show up in plastic surgery or in money. The shadow shows up in every way. If you avoid a feeling within you and you kick it into the shadow, you shove it back into the shadow and you deny reality as is in the moment. So if somebody comes up to you and says something to you that doesn't feel right, but because you're so inadequate or you're so insecure or you're so scared and you just push that feeling on the side and you smile or you just react, that feeling that's in the closet of your shadow will begin talking and become bigger and bigger, and it will come out. So this mother, she told me this story, and she was just so shocked. She said to me, since she was a little girl, she hated using public bathrooms because her mother had put the fear in her that the whole world is full of germs. So she just lives like this. You know, she's one of those mothers who has the wipes everywhere, and she keeps spraying her hands, and she keeps wiping down everything. She's one of those mothers. So she said, look, I grew up crazy. I know I'm crazy. I didn't want to pass this on to my children. I don't use public bathrooms. I don't sit in trains if I don't have to unless I'm really tired. I try to just just become a corpse going through life because I'm so afraid I'll get infected. So she's living dead, but she's afraid of dying. So she said to me one day she was taking her daughter to school, her 4-year-old daughter. And the daughter really needed to go to the bathroom. They were taking a walk to school. So the mother tried to overcome her own insecurities and said, okay, let's go to the McDonald's. You can go use the bathroom at McDonald's. Her daughter stood firm, had a big fat tantrum, and said, I am not going to use that bathroom. And the mother began thinking, okay, this is becoming really weird. I have never said this to my daughter. I have never shown her my insecurity. Why is my daughter acting like me? So she tried to bribe her and then threaten her and scold her and said, use the bathroom now. We're going to be late for school. Your teacher's going to get upset with you. You will be expelled. Use the bathroom now. The daughter refused to use the bathroom. She said, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. And the mother had to take her home and then take her to school. And she said to me, now, how could that have happened? I had been so clear, I had made a promise to myself, do not pass on this madness to your child. How did she know? So I said to her, our madness, our shadow, it sneaks in. It is in the air you breathe. It's in the water you drink. It's not in the words you say and your outer persona. It's just leaking through the psyche. So you can pretend all you like, I told her, and you can just act like you're so fearless, but that shadow is speaking louder. So till you go back, open up the closet of the shadow, peek inside, and confront your own fear and really clean up what's inside, your daughter will keep smelling, keep absorbing, and keep reacting and being your mirror. The only reason we get triggered in life is not because of the bad boss and the lazy husband and the economy and the weather. The only reason we get triggered in life is because there was stuff in the closet of the shadow, which just pounces forth, and there you're either running away or reacting. So what about this father who came to me once and he said to me, I made the biggest mistake of parenting ever. He was really, really regretting something he had done with his son the night before. So I asked him, well, what did you do? And he said, my son came to me with all his math homework. And it was all correct. Beautifully done math homework. But you know how kids, they work out the problem on the side? Well, this kid hadn't done anything on the side. Nothing was worked out. There were no scribbles. There was nothing on the side. So when the son came so proud and said, look, I did all my homework, and the father was so amazed, all the homework was correct, but where was all the hard work, all the sweat, all the frustration? Where was all that? It wasn't there. So the father made an interpretation. What interpretation do you think he made? He copied. He cheated. So he reacted. Immediately, he reacted and he said, you cheated. There's no way you could have done this. Who did you copy from? And the son said, no, Daddy, I really know it. I'm good at this. I promise. And the father said, I don't believe you. And there was a big war at home. Until the mother intervened, and the mother said, well, let's test him. Let's see if he really knows it. So they sat down and they began doing the problems again. And lo and behold, the son did it again in his head and got everything correct. So we talked about this in therapy. And the father was so remorseful, but he still hadn't understood why he reacted. So I asked him, let's open the closet of your shadow. Let's go back and see why you thought your son was the worst possible thing. We all do this. We call our children liars, lazy, useless, don't cry, don't be cowards. All these heavy words of judgment. Where do they come from? Not from the child, from our shadow. So he went back into the closet of his shadow and he said, his entire childhood, he used to cheat. And he used to be called a cheater. And he felt so much shame. And his greatest fear was that his child will not become who he was. But yet, the shadow speaks louder than our greatest intention. And it comes forth. And he will create in his child his greatest fear. What we fear the most in our children. Because our fear comes from our shadow, you see. It doesn't come from the child. All our fears come from our own shadow. all our inadequacies about our children. Oh my goodness, my child is going to just grow up and be a loser flipping burgers in McDonald's. Not from the child, from our own inadequacy, because we probably were this close to flipping burgers at McDonald's. Oh my God, my child's so fat and she's going to be rejected by her peers. This is not coming from the child. This is coming from our fears when we grew up rejected and isolated. When our child comes home and tells us that her friend hurt her at school and called her ugly, and we just jump up to rescue and hire them plastic surgery and hire them nutritionists and clean up their face and buy bleach. You know, in my country, they actually put bleach on children's faces so they become fairer. The kid was just saying, I'm angry that somebody called me fat. But no, we've bought out the whole army and spent thousands of dollars. Why? Because those expressions in our children, they're just expressions of the as is. They hook us because we have so much stuff in the closets of our shadow. So whether we like it or not, our feelings, our actions, all of it is coming from the shadow. And the shadow is not a bad place. The poor shadow has gotten such a bad rap. The shadow can be powerful. Look at what happened to Persephone. She became the queen of the underworld. 6 months in the underworld, 6 months out. She could integrate human nature, the light and the dark, confronting your shadow, seeing it